you know, when you lower the particle distance of pieces, if you don't simulate, the shape gets all crinkly as a result of the mesh going from really big to small. So that's what will happen to your wire piece if you generate this on a 20 particle distance. Sometimes the initial shape is really not very good. And essentially, I never want to simulate this piece, but I actually want to freeze it. Before I freeze it, I am actually going to backtrack. I'm going to delete this piece because I'm going to edit the shape over here and make this a little bit thinner. And then because I know this piece will never be simulated, there's a little workflow you can do to ensure the shape of the piece is really, really nice when it generates, or at least how smooth the edges of the pattern are. And you can do this by going into your settings, user settings, selecting 2D. You're looking for default particle distance. Depending on what version you're in, the default particle distance may be in a different section. But find default particle distance and you can change this to 5. So that means when a piece generates, whether you make it in 2D or 3D, it's going to automatically have a 5 particle distance. This is not something you want to do all the time. You only want to do it for very small pieces that you intend to never simulate and freeze and kind of treat them as hardware. I can close this. You don't have to restart the program for this change to take effect. Then I can go and select my flattening tool, left click to select the area, and then hit enter. And now when the piece generates, if you look in the 3D window, it's really smooth. And at this point, I am just going to freeze this. As long as you keep this frozen, you can sew to it and you can kind of build a bra around it. So now that I've created that initial piece, I am going to generate the symmetric copy and try and match the closeness to the body. I can kind of push them in a little bit if I want it closer. Just be careful that none of the parts are physically inside of the avatar. And you are going to have to eyeball this a little bit. So now that I have these pieces, I'm going to hide them. So to extract the cup part, I can do this. If I go here and I delete this point, or I left click on this segment, all of these areas, I designed them to be connected. So if I left click and hit delete on this segment, it's going to just delete up until these corners, but it actually left this bottom underwire shape for me. So I am going to use this to develop my cup pattern, because now the cup pattern will have the shape of the wire included, and I can continue to block off the rest of my sections. And then I will select flatten a straight line for the center front and for the back as well. Then I will get the flattening tool, select these 2 zones or areas and hit enter. Okay, these pieces generate. I'm going to pull them down here. Immediately what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the end of this. So here it's 3/8. This is 0.3. They're both about 0.3. So I'm going to go to this segment, offset as internal line, that distance. And then I'm going to sew that to there and this to here. This edge where the bra cut piece connects to what is the wire area should be changed to turned. Now that that's all secure, remember that our wire pieces are actually frozen. So The body that is not frozen, I'm going to duplicate that so I have both of my halves. I'm going to sew the center front and center back closed. All of the sewing to the wired part will copy if this is a symmetrically linked clone. And then I'm safe to simulate and have that all attached to the wire. These little pieces I did not set. So one thing you really should do, I maybe should have done, but it worked fine because these pieces are very small. As you continue flattening, the default particle distance does not have to stay at 5. Once you make the wire, the rest of the pieces or any pieces that you will simulate, you can generate them while you're on 20 particle distance. If you have a lower spec computer, you probably want to do this. You may want to automatically switch back to the 20 particle distance. But then I can continue making this and using these pieces as underwire. Those spaces that you're seeing is actually a result of the skin offset on the avatar. These wire pieces are really close to the surface of the avatar. I pushed them in. So the default skin offset of 3 millimeters will still push the fabric away. I would recommend maybe keeping that at like 1. And then playing with how close these pieces actually need to be. So I can push them out a tiny, tiny bit. And then there's also one final thing that I'm not going to remove. I'm going to leave it for now. It is a thing called collision thickness. Additional thickness collision is 2.5 millimeters. That is an invisible buffer around the fabric. If I set this to 0.2, that's 0.2 of a millimeter, that will get even closer. So as you're working, you see sections maybe pushing away or space that you don't really know why there's space between them. The skin offset on the avatar and then additional thickness collision on the fabric pieces will all be combining to create these little spaces. But when you move to high resolution, I'm just going to hit this to demonstrate. You can change that skin offset to 0, or it might be 0 by default. And the additional thickness collision is moved down from 2.5 to 1 millimeter, so it does keep a little bit, but you can always go lower if your fabric or your space can handle it. I'm going to hit cancel because I'm not trying to continue in high resolution. Now I'm just selecting the very top edge of my cup pattern with the edit pattern tool, turning the property called elastic on and reducing the ratio to something between 98 and 90. This will be covered in the following section about garment details. But with flattening, you can create really tight, small boning or wire type areas by flattening them out and freezing them so they don't become pliable. So that concludes this tutorial about flattening. I'm not going to continue building this. From here on, it would be kind of the regular editing process and building process. I just wanted to show you these details about the initial creation using the flattening tool. Thanks a lot for watching. Check out the description below for links to more tutorials.